Readings of Almighty God's Words. Exposing Antichrists.
Item 10. They despise the truth, brazenly flout principles, and ignore the arrangements of God's house. Part 7. When Antichrists read God's words, their focus and intentions are completely opposite to those who pursue the truth. Those who pursue the truth, regardless of God's way of speaking, are only interested in understanding God's intentions, the truth principles, and what people should uphold and follow. In contrast, the Antichrists push these things to the back of their minds and ignore them, even feeling averse to phrases that relate to these things, and secretly contradicting phrases and terms that concern these things. After achieving certain results, they continue to delve deeper and more meticulously into scrutinizing what God's way of speaking and tone are, what the nuances of His intonation are like, what words He chooses, not even sparing the details of His grammar and usual syntax, using the same approach as before. To get closer to their goal, Antichrists secretly resolve in their hearts to scrutinize even harder and more intensely and profoundly God's words, scrutinizing the aims and objectives behind God's speech, and even scrutinizing the way God, the speaker addressing humankind and the entire universe, expresses Himself. Antichrists tirelessly scrutinize every aspect of God's speaking, attempting to imitate God's speech and pass themselves off as possessing God's essence, possessing what God has and is, and possessing God's disposition. All this seems to happen so naturally and smoothly. They work and act toward their goals as a matter of course, and also as a matter of course, and without realizing it, transform themselves into God, into a figure of admiration and following for others. They scrutinize how God's words touch people's hearts and expose their corrupt dispositions, how God's words expose people's various states, and even more so, how God's words achieve effects in people. What is their purpose in scrutinizing all this? It is to enter people's hearts, grasp their actual situations, and, while thoroughly perceiving their inner thoughts, mislead and control them. When God's words expose people's corrupt dispositions and strike at their weak points, Antichrists think, "These words, this manner, are so great and wonderful. I also want to speak like this. I want to employ this way of speaking and treat people in this manner." Throughout their many years of reading and becoming familiar with God's words, the Antichrists increasingly regard their wish and desire to become God as their sole goal in believing in God. Therefore, no matter how God's words speak about requiring people to pursue the truth and do things according to principles, as well as all other realities of positive things, Antichrists do not take this in, and they disregard it. They single-mindedly pursue their own objective, doing what they want according to their own motivations for acting, as if nobody else matters. Not a single sentence of God's words moves their hearts or changes their outlook on life and their philosophy for worldly dealings. Much less does any sentence, any sermon, or any utterance from God lead them to have a repentant heart. Regardless of what God's words expose, no matter what corrupt dispositions of man they expose, Antichrists only scrutinize God's way of speaking, His tone, the effects that God's words are intended to achieve in people, and so forth. All matters unrelated to the truth. Therefore, the more Antichrists are exposed to God's words, the stronger their inner desire to be God becomes. How intense is this desire? It reaches the point where they even recite God's words in their dreams, often talking to themselves and practicing preaching God's words using His manner of speaking and tone. In the depths of their hearts, they constantly repeat God's way of speaking and tone as if possessed. Such are Antichrists. No matter how specific, earnest, or genuine God's words are, no matter how much help or inspiration they offer to people, Antichrists remain indifferent toward and disregard all of this. They don't value these words of God. Where are their hearts? They are focused on how to imitate God's words in a way that makes people idolize them. The more intense their desire, the more they hope to hear God's voice and be able to understand the purpose, wish, and thoughts behind each sentence spoken by God, even His innermost thinking. The more intense the Antichrist's desires and wishes become, the more they want to imitate God's way of speaking, and the more they aspire to quickly transform themselves to be more like God within a short time, possessing the way of speaking and tone of God. What's more, some even want to adopt the style and demeanor of God in their actions. Antichrists are in such a condition, living every day under these thoughts, ideas, intentions, and motives. What are they doing? They are compelling themselves daily to walk the path of becoming God, becoming Christ. They believe this path is above board, that it is a bright road. So, whether at gatherings or get-togethers, no matter how others fellowship their understanding of God's words and their feelings about experiencing God's words, nothing can move them or change their goals and wishes. They stride on the path toward becoming Christ, toward becoming God, as if they are possessed, as if they are controlled by an invisible entity, as if they wear invisible shackles. What sort of mindset is this? Isn't it vile? While reading God's words, Antichrists absorb every aspect of them as their own possessions, treating them as commodities that can win them higher benefits and more money. When these commodities are sold, when these things are flaunted, they gain the benefits they desire. The more they do this, the more satisfied they feel internally. The more they do this, the greater and more intense their desire to be God becomes. What kind of attitude, what kind of situation is this? Why is Antichrist's desire to be God so strong? Is it something someone taught them? Who has instigated or instructed them? Do God's words demand this? This is the path chosen by the Antichrists themselves. Though they have no external help, they are so driven. Why is this? It is determined by their nature essence. Antichrists tirelessly, unhesitatingly, and unapologetically walk this path without any external assistance. No matter how you condemn them, it is of no use. No matter how you dissect them, they do not take it in or understand. It is as if they are possessed. These things are determined by their nature. Antichrist's treatment of God's words appears, on the surface, to not be resistant or slanderous. They put in effort, more even than the average person. If you don't know what they are thinking internally or the path they are following, then based on outward appearances, their treatment of God's words seems to be one of yearning. At least this term could be used to describe it. But can a person's essence be seen merely from their outward appearance? So, where can it be seen? Although it appears that they yearn for God's words, often reading and listening to them, and even memorizing them, and although judging from these outward actions, they should not be categorized as antichrists. When it comes to practicing God's words in real situations, do they do so? After reading God's words and memorizing them, when they are confronted with real situations, they might sometimes quote a passage of or recite a few sentences of God's words, even accurately at times. But after they quote God's words, observe what they do, what path they take, and what choices they make in the face of situations. If it involves their status or something that might damage their reputation or image, they absolutely will not act according to God's words. They protect their own image and status. If they do something wrong, they absolutely will not admit it. Instead, they will find all sorts of ways to cover it up or avoid the issue, not mentioning it, and even passing the blame for something they did onto others rather than admitting their own fault. They put effort into reading God's words and safeguarding their status, but when it comes to putting aside their own interests and enduring physical hardship in order to practice the truth and act according to the truth principles, observe how they choose. If they are to act according to principles, to protect the interests of God's house regardless of whom it hurts or offends, will they do it? Absolutely not. Their first choice is always to protect themselves. Even if they know who is at fault or who has committed evil, they will not expose them. They might even secretly rejoice in their hearts. If someone exposes evil people, they will even defend and make excuses for the evil ones. It is clear that antichrists are people who take pleasure in the misfortunes of others. Regardless of the situation they face, observe what they choose and which path they take. If they choose to act according to the truth principles, then their eating and drinking God's words has borne fruit. If not, then no matter how they eat and drink God's words, or how well they memorize them, it is of no use. They still aren't treating God's words as the truth. Moreover, do antichrists know themselves? Some people say, but antichrists even acknowledge their arrogance and self-righteousness, saying they are devils and satans. They just say these things, but what do they actually do when faced with a real situation? If someone is working with an antichrist and says something correct, something in line with the truth principles that contradicts the wrong thing the antichrist said, and if that person refuses to go along with what the Antichrist says, the Antichrist will feel their image and status have been harmed. What do they choose then? Could they choose to put themselves aside to listen to the other person and act according to the truth principles? Absolutely not. So, are those correct words they say of any use? Do they reflect their reality, their real stature, their choices, or the path they walk? No, those words are not born from their experience. They are simply words they have learned. What comes out of their mouths are just doctrines, deceptive words. As soon as their status or self-interest becomes involved, Antichrist's first choice is always to preserve and protect themselves, to benumb and mislead others, and to avoid taking any responsibility or admitting any transgressions. Considering these essences of Antichrists, are they pursuing the truth? Are they reading God's words to understand the truth and to reach a point where they can practice the truth? No. Given the intentions and goals of Antichrists in reading God's words, they will never achieve an understanding of them. This is because they do not read God's words as the truth to be comprehended, but rather as a vehicle to achieve their own goals. Although Antichrists do not explicitly state, "I want to be God, I want to be Christ," their goal to become Christ is clear from the essence of their actions and the essence of how they treat God's words. How can this be observed? They use God's words and what they see revealed by God, such as His possessions and being and so on, to mislead people, to mislead those who do not understand the truth, the ignorant, those with little stature, those who do not pursue the truth, disbelievers, and even some evil people. They lead these people to believe that they possess the truth, that they are correct people, and that they are figures worthy of admiration and reliance. Antichrists aim to make these people place hopes in and seek from them, and when this happens, they feel satisfied inside. Antichrists never admit that God is unique. They never admit that God's words are the truth, nor do they ever admit that only God can express the truth. Judging from their attitude toward God's words, the effort they put into God's words, and their desire to be God, to become Christ, Antichrists believe that it is easy for a person to become God, that it is something achievable by humans. They say, God incarnate is called Christ simply because He can speak a bit of God's words, no? Isn't He just a mouthpiece for God's words? Isn't it just about having many people follow Him? So, if a person also has the same status and reputation among people, if they are also idolized and looked up to by just as many people, can't they enjoy the treatment of Christ, the treatment of being God? To be able to enjoy the treatment of Christ, to enjoy the treatment of the one who has God's identity and essence, doesn't that make one God? What's so difficult about that? Thus, Antichrist's desire to be God is inherent. They share the same ambition and essence as Satan. It is precisely because they are Antichrists and possess the essence of Antichrists that they exhibit these reactions toward God's words. For Antichrists, what makes them happy is that God has incarnated. His words can be heard by people, and at the same time, He can be seen by them. He is an ordinary person who can be touched and seen, and it is precisely because this ordinary, insignificant, and unremarkable person can speak so much and thus be called God, that Antichrists see their opportunity to become God has finally arrived. If this ordinary person did not speak, Antichrists would think that their hope of becoming God or Christ is very slim. But precisely because this ordinary person has spoken God's words and done God's work, representing God to save people among them, Antichrists see this as their chance, as an opportunity to take advantage of, giving them more clues to imitate God's speech, His tone and way of speaking, and even His disposition, gradually making themselves more like God, more like Christ. Thus, in the depths of their hearts, Antichrists feel they are becoming more and more like God, that they are increasingly approximating God. They feel so very envious of a God who is revered, followed, and relied upon in all things, a God whom people seek and look up to in everything. They envy the identity and personal worth of Christ. What are Antichrists thinking in their hearts? Aren't the depths of their hearts dark and wicked? Aren't the depths of their hearts despicable, sordid, and shameful? They are utterly revolting. Some people say, "We've listened to you go on about Antichrists, but how come we've never seen such a person? Are you just telling stories? Talking about things that are far-fetched? Do you think such people exist? How many have you met? Are you one of them?"
We also show these states and reveal such aspects. They're not as severe as Antichrists, but the nature essence is the same.
Do you think having these states is dangerous?
Yes.
If you know it's dangerous, you need to change. Is it easy to change? Actually, it can be both easy and difficult. If you take God's words as the truth to abide by, just as simply as the Lord Jesus said, let your communication be, yes, yes, no, no, then you can truly repent. For instance, God tells you to implement something, saying, after eating, lick the bowl clean, as if it has been washed. This is saving food and also being hygienic. Are these instructions simple? Are they easy to implement? If God makes such a request, just these few sentences, without going into people's difficulties or their states, or talking about corrupt dispositions, and not differentiating various circumstances, how would you implement and practice this one matter? For you, these sentences are God's words. They are the truth, and they are something you should abide by. What you should do is to follow God's requirement every day, every time after eating. Then you are following God's way, treating God's words as the truth, as what you ought to obey. You become a person who practices God's words, and in this simplest matter, you have cast off the disposition of an Antichrist. Alternatively, you might instead, after hearing these few words, verbally agree and remember them. But after eating, when you see a few grains of rice left in the bowl, you think, I'm busy with other things, and just leave the bowl as it is. And the next meal, you do the same. You keep these few instructions from God in mind, but there's no exact day when you are actually going to practice them. As time goes by, you forget these words. So not only have you not practiced them, but you have also discarded God's words. What kind of person does this make you? If you don't implement these words, are you someone who can follow God's way upon hearing His words? Are you someone who pursues the truth? Clearly not. If one is not pursuing the truth, can they be characterized as an Antichrist? Is failing to practice the truth necessarily equivalent to being an Antichrist?
No.
This kind of person treats the words of God as wind passing by their ears, as something unimportant, doesn't practice them, and doesn't give them much thought. They simply forget them. This is not an Antichrist. There is another type of person who, after hearing these instructions from God, thinks, licking the bowl after eating? How embarrassing. I'm not a beggar, and besides, it's not like there's no food available. I definitely won't do that. Those who are willing to lick their bowls clean can go ahead. When someone says, "This is God's requirement," they think, even if it's God's requirement, it's unacceptable. God shouldn't demand such things. These words aren't the truth. God also says things that are unremarkable, illogical, and not so great. Not all of God's demands of people are necessarily the truth. This particular demand doesn't seem like the truth to me. The Lord Jesus said, "Whoever shall follow the will of my Father which is in heaven, the same is my brother and sister and mother." Words like this are the truth. Licking a bowl clean after eating is being hygienic? Just washing it directly would be enough. Why have us lick the bowls? This demand doesn't fit with my notions or imaginings. It would be unacceptable anywhere. Making me lick a bowl? Fat chance. Is that how hygiene is defined? I wash my bowl with water, using disinfectant. That's what I call hygiene. This type of person, after hearing these words, has their own thoughts and internal resistance. They even engage in ridicule and slander. Because these words are from God, they don't dare to judge them openly. But it doesn't mean they have no opinions or notions about them. Where do their opinions and notions manifest? They do not accept or practice these words. They have their own thoughts about them, and are capable of judging them and forming notions about them. Therefore, when they finish their meal and see some people licking their bowls clean, they refrain from doing so, even harboring contempt in their heart for those who practice according to God's words. Their exterior often reveals mockery and ridicule, and even an attitude of wanting to correct others' behavior. They not only do not act according to what God says, but even act contrarily, engaging in actions opposite to those. They use their actions to deny God's demands, to resist what God has said, and they also seek to draw more attention through their actions, persuading more people that what God says is incorrect, and that only their way is right, leading more people to resist and condemn God's words. They simply do not act as God has instructed. Each time after eating, they not only rinse their bowl with water, but also wash it repeatedly with disinfectant and dish soap, and then sterilize it in a disinfection cabinet. While doing this, they also unconsciously generate some statements, telling everyone, actually, licking doesn't eliminate germs, and neither does washing with water. Only by using disinfectant, combined with high temperature, can it be thoroughly sterilized. That's being hygienic. They not only refuse to accept what God says or practice as instructed by God, but they even use their own words and deeds to resist, condemn, and judge what God requires. Even more extreme, they use some opinions they deem correct to incite and mislead more people to join them in condemning, resisting, and judging God's requirements. What role are they playing here? It's not to lead more people to listen to God's words and unconditionally submit to God, nor to resolve people's notions when they arise, nor to resolve contradictions between people and God or people's corrupt dispositions when such contradictions arise. Instead, they incite and mislead more people to judge God, joining them in analyzing and scrutinizing the correctness of God's words. Outwardly, they appear to be upholders of justice, engaging in what seems rightful. But is this rightful conduct befitting someone who follows God? Is this a human sense of justice? Then, what exactly is the essence of this type of person behind their behavior?
They have the essence of Antichrists, of devils.
These individuals not only fail to regard God's words as the truth, but what's more shameful is that they can disguise themselves as spiritual people, often using God's words to instruct others, thereby embellishing themselves and gaining admiration. They themselves do not practice God's words, nor do they treat them as the truth to experience and implement. Yet, they often sternly and solemnly tell others, God said, after eating, lick your bowl clean. It's a good habit and conserves food. With every word and sentence, they brandish the banner of God said, this is God's word, or this is the truth, but they themselves do not accept or practice it at all. Furthermore, they produce various judgments and fallacious interpretations of God's words. This is what Antichrists do. Having just analyzed the manifestations of these three types of people, which is the most severe?
The last type.
This type of person does not practice God's words themselves and is full of various resistances and judgments against God's words. Moreover, they use God's words to mislead others and achieve their own goals. Such people are antichrists. Regardless of the aspect of God's words, even if these words accord with their notions, they do not regard God's words as the truth. This is especially so for those words of God that completely contradict human notions, traditional culture, and philosophy. Antichrists place even less importance on these words. Why would they preach God's words if they don't view them as important? They want to use God's words to fulfill their purposes. The most dangerous of these three types of people is the last one. What about the first type?
They listen to God's words and practice them.
Do you think those who listen to God's words and practice them are all mindless? On the surface, does it seem somewhat foolish to strictly obey whatever God says and has people do? Those who practice God's words are the smartest. The second type of person focuses on action. They do not practice the truth, but only act according to their own will and perform some labor. They do not pay attention to the meaning or requirements and standards of God's words. They do not apprehend God's intentions or His inner voice, and just focus on doing. They think, "I know you mean well for us. Everything you say is right. We should submit to and practice what you say. You just focus on talking, and we'll all listen." But in reality, they do not take seriously what God says or the detailed requirements God has for people. They just act thoughtlessly. Acting thoughtlessly can sometimes lead to acting wildly and unscrupulously, to causing disruptions and disturbances. It can lead to resisting God. Resisting God to a severe extent sometimes causes a great deal of trouble, and this in turn can lead to destruction. This is the most serious consequence for those who do not pursue the truth, and some people can reach this point. The third type of person, the Antichrists, are staunch followers of Satan. They never practice the truth, no matter what. Even if what you say is right, they won't listen, let alone when they have their own notions. They are the sworn enemies of God, the sworn enemies of the truth. Outwardly, the most cunning and astute appear to be these people. They discern and scrutinize everything, pondering and striving to figure out all matters. However, after so much scrutinizing, they end up scrutinizing God Himself, developing notions and opinions about Him. No matter what God does, if it doesn't pass their own judgment, they condemn it without exception. They refuse to practice it, fearing it might be detrimental to them. On the other hand, those who seem foolish outwardly, as if they lack intelligence, do exactly as God says. They appear exceptionally simple and honest, openly sharing even what shouldn't be shared, even reporting what need not be reported, sometimes even displaying somewhat naive behavior. What does this indicate? It shows that such people's hearts are open to God, not closed or blocked off from Him. By discussing this simple example, the purpose is to help you understand just what an Antichrist is and what their attitude toward God's words is really like. It's to help you discern just which type of people are Antichrists and which type do not practice the truth but are not Antichrists. It's to have this kind of discernment. I just casually brought up this example to make it easier for you to better understand the topic we are fellowshipping today. It's not that I'm actually asking you to lick your bowls clean after meals. Nor have I defined that licking bowls is synonymous with hygiene or not wasting food. You don't need to do this. You mustn't misunderstand. Today, an additional item regarding how Antichrists despise God's words was fellowshipped. Antichrists treat the words of God as a commodity. When it comes to commodities, selling, trading, profit, and money are involved. Antichrists treating God's words as a commodity is something that should absolutely never be done. It is utterly sinful. Why? When we just began the gathering, everyone fellowshipped their understanding of God's words and the truth in their own language, summarizing in the simplest terms. Overall, God's words are the truth. For humankind, the truth is crucially important. The truth can be the life of man. It can save people and bring them back from the dead. and enable one to become a qualified created being. The value of the truth to humankind cannot be measured in words, material things, or money. It deserves to be cherished and treasured, and it's worthy of being the guide, direction, and goal for one's actions, conduct, life, and entire existence. People should attain the path of practice from the truth, as well as the path of fearing God and shunning evil, among others. To people, the truth is equivalent to life itself. No material object or wealth can be mentioned in the same breath as the truth. In this material world, or in the entire universe world, there is nothing that is worthy of being compared with the truth, nor is there anything that can equate to it. From this, it is clear that for humankind in need of salvation, the truth is a most precious asset, and it is priceless. Yet, astonishingly, there are individuals who treat such a priceless thing as a commodity to sell and trade for profit. Can such individuals be characterized as devils, as Satans? Absolutely. In the spiritual realm, such individuals are devils and Satan. Among people, they are antichrists. We just fellowshipped some of the manifestations of how antichrists treat God's words as commodities for sale to gain personal benefits. Of course, this is said in a certain sense and doesn't completely match the literal meaning. It's not plainly visible that they are treating God's words as commodities for sale. However, in fact, judging by their behavior, approach, and even their essence, they have already, or with utmost certainty, treated God's words as commodities, as a material thing to possess. Once in their possession, they treat God's words as an item in their little shop, selling it at the opportune moment to anyone in need and profiting from it. What benefits do antichrists gain from this? These include their reputation, the high regard and idolization from others, the admiring glances cast their way, and the protection others offer. Protection to their status and face. Even when they are removed and eliminated, people will speak up for and defend them. These are the benefits antichrists derive from God's words. These benefits are exactly what antichrists want and pursue, what they have long schemed for in their hearts. This is the essence of antichrists. Their actions and behavior are driven and dominated by their nature, and from these manifestations, the nature essence of antichrists can be seen.